evening. Thank you for coming. I'm Doris Wise-Montrose, and I'm president of Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors. All of us here tonight understand full well we have won a lottery simply by living in the United States of America. Clearly, we are able to live a life of considerable privilege. As for myself, for example, I was born in Canada, the only country that would take my parents after the war, only because my mother had a brother already living there. As a young child who moved to America, to California, I've never known hunger, nor do I have to agonize over where I would lay my head at night. I go where I want and I do what I want. I feel free and safe to speak my mind. Opportunities abound, and the only limits were those I put on myself. It is only the luck of the draw that this is my life. With great privilege comes great responsibility. One of our privileges is the privilege to vote, to express our feelings about the world through our choices, and should be entered into with care and effort. If we do not, we might well lose that privilege. Many in the world are denied the chance to choose their leaders. The only thing that denies us the chance to vote is our own actions. Focusing on presidential elections since 1980, it appears that about 30% of Jewish voters may be characterized as swing voters, swayed by general as well as Jewish issues, particularly the economy, Israel, and social concerns. In close presidential elections, swing voters like these hold the balance of power on election night. Consequently, as politicians since 1868 have recognized, neither party can take the Jewish vote for granted. Jewish history and the meaningful memories of our recent past, much less our long history as a people, does and should inform our considerations. Children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors has built an organization which has looked at contemporary issues in America, Israel, and the world with perspective and care, precisely because we are wiser when we think about the news of the day in context. In the 2012 election, Jewish concerns need to be addressed to attract the support of Jewish voters. What do Jewish voters want? How much does the Jewish factor? How much does the Israel factor in the Jewish vote? Which party represents and addresses Jewish concerns? The participants who will discuss these election issues tonight are expert and well-respected in the American political arena. Our panel tonight is composed of Larry Greenfield, the past California Director of the Republican Jewish Coalition, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, Vice President of Rabbis for Obama, and David A. Lehrer, President of Community Advocates Incorporated, a Los Angeles-based human relations organization chaired by former Mayor Richard Riordan. Their credentials are impressive. As always, I would like to thank the Lux Hotel Sunset and their wonderful staff for their continued support in providing us with this beautiful venue and care. Following the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. It is now my pleasure to turn the mic over to David Lehrer for introductory remarks, and our presentation will begin.
Good evening. My name is David Lehrer. I'm president of Community Advocates, as Doris said, and I'd like to just have one admonition. Even though my name is Lehrer, like Jim Lehrer, I will try to do a better job with my conversations tonight. Prior to heading Community Advocates for the past 10 years, I was the counsel and director of the Anti-Defamation League for 27 years in the city. I think we have a special opportunity tonight to hear from two spokesmen for the major campaigns for the presidency and discuss with them the major issues through the prism of the Jewish community. Is there a particular set of issues in 2012 that deserve the attention of the Jewish community? And if they are, what are they? And do President Obama and Governor Romney come out, where do they come out on those issues? Before I introduce our discussants, I'd like one caveat and an admonition. We are not here to discuss whether Barack Obama is a closet Muslim. We're not here to discuss whether he attended a jihadi madrasa, and we're not here to discuss whether he was born in the United States. Those are charges that have from time to time made the rounds of email chains within the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community. we have chosen instead to focus on substantive issues and positions and policy prescriptions of both camps that will affect where this country goes in the next 4 years. Tom Friedman observed 4 years ago that it's a tricky business. If Israel is your voting priority, then at least ask the right questions about Mr. Obama. Knock off the churlish whispering campaign about what's in his heart on Israel and what was in Richard Nixon's heart. And focus first on what kind of America you think he'd build, and second, whether you believe that as president, he'd have the smarts, the steel, and the cunning to seize a historic opportunity. As Doris suggested, Jews make up about 2% of the United States population, but they play an outsized role in U.S. politics. As a community, we are predictably Democratic. From a low of 54% voting Democratic in 1980 to 84% Democratic in 1992, down to 76% for Obama in 2008. The Jews are about as Democratic as it gets. I think that in terms of identifiable groups, only the African American community is more predictably Democratic than the Jewish community. However, a marginal shift in Jewish support for a candidate can make a difference. Not in California, not New York. Sorry to tell you, we are irrelevant. But in Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and perhaps New Jersey, and other battleground states, and with major donors. With that as a prologue, let us begin the debate. Mary Greenfield.
Well, hi everybody. Thank you to children of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Doris. Thank you, David. Good evening, Rabbi Dorff. And nice to be with everybody. I don't think there are any voters who are relevant. There was an election in New York recently after Anthony Weiner left Congress, and a pretty good response by the Jewish community for the Republicans, so you never know. So I don't think any voter should be written off, and that's why I'm grateful that you're all here and thinking, and this will be broadcast around the country, and I hope open-minded voters will take our hopefully statesman-like approach and policy prescriptions sincerely. In 2008, candidate Senator Barack Obama promised that he would be not for the red states or the blue states, but for the United States. He made many promises, but that in particular is the one that he broke, that broke the hearts of many Americans. This has been an ideological presidency. And tonight I will lay out my concerns for the mistakes and some of the corruption even, and certainly some of the blunders and difficulties that the American people have as they judge this candidate as he runs for re-election. The election is a referendum on President Obama, and I don't think he merits another term. It's also a choice between President Obama and Governor Romney. I would testify about Governor Romney with great confidence. He's a friend of mine. He knows the Jewish community well. He cares a lot about religious liberty. As a Mormon, he's very sensitive to issues of minority communities. He's been to Israel repeatedly. And he said his first trip as a president would be to Israel. He's somebody we can like. He's a person of loving kindness and charity, a good family man, a patriotic American, a problem solver, a success in business, and a hero of the Olympic Games that were held in the United States. In 1912, 100 years ago, there was a campaign that was more disputatious even than the one we're having now. The incumbent president, William Howard Taft, had his vice president, he witnessed his being killed a week before the election. Another Republican ran against him, Teddy Roosevelt, running for a third term. He'd already been 2 times president. And then there was a socialist, Eugene Debs, who was running. And then there was a Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. By the way, Teddy Roosevelt was shot during the campaign, and the bullet hit both his glasses case and a thick speech in his pocket. So he survived. I don't think we have that much violence, thank God, in 100 years later in the 2012 campaign, but we do have a pretty vigorous debate. What I'd like to do tonight is focus on political philosophy and policy differences and some of the character issues that people think about when they think of a chief executive. The presidency should be about statesmanship. It should be about truth-telling. It should be about credibility and service to the American people. It should be about responsibility. It should not be hiding the ball on what really is terrorism in the world. It should be telling us the truth, not that the private sector is doing fine. It's not doing fine. The president should be a person who loves all the American people and is not hostile to different groups and pit them against each other. This president picked on the Chamber of Commerce, those dangerous people, or the cop in Boston, or the town of Las Vegas, or doctors who he said want to remove limbs and tonsils for profit. Every chance he's had, he's been a divisive figure. And I'll give you two big examples. When the president first assumed his presidency, he had a Democratic Congress, Senate, and House. And instead of being the president of everybody and fixing the economy, he went for a cram down of his health care reform. Remember Gatorade and the Louisiana Purchase and the Cornhusker kickback and the late-at-night deals, and we'll find out what's in the bill after they've written it, and 2,700 pages that nobody read. It did not impress the American people. They not only disagreed at the policy level, they disagreed that he wouldn't reach across the aisle and give the Republicans something. He probably still could have gotten most of what he wanted in his agenda over the course of 4 years, but give the Republicans tort reform or other sensitive and sensible ideas. Instead, he said, I won. And he basically divided America then and then. Governor Romney will be very different. He met every Monday as governor of Massachusetts with the Democrats. Obviously, they were 87% of the legislature in Massachusetts. And he crafted bipartisan solutions. And he was a Massachusetts moderate. He may or may not be more conservative than that, but he at least has exhibited the willingness to work across the aisle. He's a problem solver. Then the president had one last chance to be everybody's president. After the, quote, shellacking in the 2010 midterm elections, he could have said during the 2011 State of the Union, as President Bill Clinton did in 1995, after he lost to Congress in 1994. I got the message. There's now a Republican Congress. I'm not going to spend 2 years running against the Republicans. Let's work on entitlement reform. Let's work on the economy. Let's use as the basis my own commission, the Simpson-Bowles Commission, and work on debt and Social Security and Medicare. But instead he said, no, my way or the highway. I'm the president. I will run against the Congress for the next 2 years. It's been a difficult presidency. Lastly, I want to say in my opening that you will find an elegant, balanced, and I think friendly and civil dialogue between me and the Rabbi on the three big silos of American politics: prosperity and the economy. I'm going to argue that Judaism never argued for socialism or redistributionist economy, but rather, as Milton Friedman suggested, we honor the fruits of the labor of people, and then we command them to be charitable. That doesn't mean big government, we send money all the way to Washington and some of it trickles back, spent inefficiently. So we'll talk about the economy and prosperity from a Jewish perspective. Second, I think we'll talk about redemption and liberation, meaning national security and foreign policy. And here I think the president is going to have a tough case to make for the Jewish community, for the way he's treated the Prime Minister of Israel, for his views about Araby, for the Cairo speech, and I will document for you the range of concerns we have about his counterterrorism policy, about the choices they make or don't make regarding Libya, and because bin Laden was killed doesn't mean there's no more Al-Qaeda or dangers to the world. And then finally we'll talk about social issues, and I think what I can say is that we like standards, we like traditional values, we look to the text and tradition to teach us something, and we're liberty lovers, and we want to be sensitive and caring and hopeful to all. So we'll talk about abortion and gay marriage. I don't think those are the driving issues of the election at this time. I think jobs and the economy are. I think the president's record is not good. I think we have $16 trillion in debt. I think we have the worst job performance in a generation. I think we have rising gas prices and healthcare premiums. And I think the president has not done a good job and doesn't merit re-election, and I'll make that case tonight.
I do think the president merits re-election. I think he merits re-election enthusiastically, actually. And I'm going to talk about it in terms of the same three things that Larry described: economics, foreign policy, and social issues. So first on the economics. The Bush administration inherited a surplus and left us with the largest deficit that we've ever had. And that's what President Obama inherited. What would have been an actual depression again, what we were saved from based upon the National Recovery Act that he got passed in the first several months of his administration. Arlen Specter, alav shalom, voted for that National Recovery Act, one of 3 Republicans in the Senate to do so, precisely because, as he said, he did not want another Great Depression, and he had lived through that Great Depression. The jobless rate has now fallen to 7.8%, and it's falling further now, given the fact that the initiatives that President Obama took are beginning to take hold. It took a long time for that to happen. It's not enough. We should be less than that. But the fact of the matter is that we're not at 12 or 20%, as a number of other countries are. And that I think that's largely a function of the economic policies that he put into place. According to the Nonpartisan Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Congressman Ryan's budget, on the other hand, calls for radical policy changes that would result in a massive transfer of resources from the broad majority of Americans to the nation's wealthiest individuals. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities further explains that under Congressman Ryan's plan, which Governor Romney endorsed, those making between $20,000 and $30,000 per year would save $246 annually, while those making more than $1 million a year per year would save $265,000 and $11. That's fundamentally unfair. It doesn't end there. Congressman Ryan would like to end Medicare as we know it, turning it into a voucher system which puts the burden of payment on the backs of seniors. According to CBS News, the elderly would have to pay as much as 68% of their health care coverage under Congressman Ryan's plan, compared to the 25% they currently pay. What's more, according to the Urban Institute, a nonpartisan think tank, the plan would replace Medicaid with block grants, causing between 14 to 27 million low-income Americans to lose health insurance. That budget hurts the worst off among us, cutting $134 billion in food stamps, taking away $170 billion in Pell Grants for student scholarships, and terminating the Veterans Affairs Supportive Housing Program, a program developed to end veteran homelessness in 5 years. Robert Greenstein, president of the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, summed it up best when he said, "This budget is Robin Hood in reverse on steroids." And let me point out that just in yesterday's paper, yesterday's Los Angeles Times, you know that Congressman Ryan is a Catholic, but the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops, in letters to Congress, have described the budget proposal by Representative Paul Ryan, Catholic now vying for Vice President, as, quote, failing a basic moral test. So it seems to me that on economic grounds, first of all, President Obama has indeed saved us from another depression, and we're beginning to get the results of that. Now, on foreign policy. First of all, Governor Romney has zero experience in regard to foreign policy. What he did was go to England and effectively insult one of our closest allies, and then he went to Israel and made it virtually impossible for him under a Romney administration to make peace between the Arabs and the Israelis by virtue of what he said. In contrast, what has Obama done? We in the Jewish tradition know, Lo ha-midrash ha'ikar ela ha-ma'aseh. The explanation is not the real issue, the question is the action. Israel's Defense Minister Ehud Barak, who should know better than anyone in this room, has said that this president has done more than any other American president in history to enhance Israel's security, raising the level of U.S.-Israel security cooperation to unprecedented levels. In 2010, Obama personally requested that Congress grant $205 million to Israel to help fund Iron Dome, which has successfully intercepted close to 80% of the short-range rockets fired from Gaza. This past May, the president granted an additional $70 million in immediate assistance to expand the Iron Dome program. In addition, the president more than doubled funding from the previous administration's level, from $52 million in 2008 to more than $110 million this year, for David Sling, Israel's missile defense program. Finally, in the midst of these challenging economic times, the president has requested $3.1 billion in military aid to Israel in 2013, the most aid ever sent to Israel. Against Iran, the president has enforced the toughest sanctions ever passed in an effort to thwart the nuclear program of Israel's greatest enemy. His deft political maneuvering has brought about an international sanctions regime that includes Russia and China, two states that under the prior U.S. administration had refused to take part in efforts to isolate Iran. In addition, the president has signed into law the most stringent unilateral sanctions against Iran in history, including sanctions on Iran's central bank. So that's on foreign policy. And then finally on social issues. The president is interested in preserving the right of free choice for people for women to have some kind of control over their bodies. The president is interested in making sure that birth control is available to those who want to have sex but do not want to have children and therefore want to avoid abortions. The president has been interested and has funded the Pell Grants and the food stamps program and all of these kinds of things that are part of the safety net that we as Americans, and especially we as Jews, should very much support. So consequently, on all three of these strands, right, on economics, on foreign policy, especially vis-a-vis Israel, and on social issues, it seems to me that the president has done a wonderful job over the last 4 years. Not perfect, the world is not perfect, and he inherited a terrible situation, but he has done an amazing thing with that, and deserves our vote in this election.
Professor Benny Morris, the great historian who moved from left to right, has documented how the Palestinians have been unwilling to accept 2 states for 2 people. The president had concerning advisors and a worldview before he took office. Remember Rashid Khalidi and Edward Said and a whole host of people in his world. Ali Abu Nima, who had to say, I'm running for office now, I can't be as radical as we all were. But then when he got to office, the president decided to make his first phone call to the Palestinian Authority, make his first interview with Al Arabiya, give his first big speech in Cairo, where he created a moral equivalency between the Arabs and the Israelis, and spoke in many other ways that were concerning to Jewish Americans and pro-Israel Americans more broadly. For example, it is not 3,000 years of Jewish history which gives the Jews sovereign rights over Jerusalem and over a tiny Jewish state of Israel, but it is merely the Holocaust, which is the Arab narrative about Israel. The president appointed a lot of people who were of concern, and basically organized an approach to Israel which has placed the burden on Israel and the settlement policy as the pivot point for his entire foreign policy. Remember, it was the settlements and the beating up of Israel, and Biden, it wasn't the first time, Biden all the way back with Menachem Begin got into a big fight over U.S.-Israel relations. But then Hillary Clinton piled on. And they said you can't even build Jewish apartments in Jerusalem. They picked on Israel about the 67 borders, and in a whole host of ways put the emphasis on creating space between the U.S. and Israel. In the president's own words, he said, it didn't work out so well, the closeness between the U.S. and Israel. We need space between the Israelis and the Americans. The treatment of Bibi Netanyahu is the test case. It's the example of the feelings of the president. He'd rather be doing talk shows and do other things than meet with the prime minister. And on the question of Iran, which I'm sure we'll get to, he said it's a lot of noise what the Israelis are saying. He's been more interested in containing the Israelis than he's been in containing Iran. And in one specific rebuttal to what was said by the Honorable Rabbi, the president delayed and opposed the sanctions on Iran for a long time.
Yes.
The Congress had to push in a bipartisan way. Then he signed on to the sanctions, then he's watered them down, and he's given a lot of waivers on the sanctions regarding Iran. He first approached Iran by saying, let's engage them, let's send them nice letters, happy birthday, Iran. And of course he didn't oppose the Iranian mullahs during the 2009 June, when Netta was killed in the streets, dissident revolution in Iran. He didn't stand by the people of Iran. By the way, he's had a terrible record on human rights more broadly. The president even opposes sanctions on countries that use child soldiers. He's been very inactive in foreign policy and very unwilling to confront, for example, the conditions on aid to Egypt, or conditions on aid to Palestinians, or to be active in foreign policy on behalf of the U.S.-Israel relationship, or American strength in resolving the countries. The president opposed the sanctions on Iran. He's given waivers on the sanctions related to Iran. He says he won't let Iran have a nuclear weapon, but there can't be a red line. He won't tell us what is the point at which we ought to be concerned enough to engage military option regarding Iran. Last sentence, to have a policy of all options on the table regarding Iran means they have to believe that we'll use that option. They don't believe we'll use that option. How do we know? Because the president's chief military advisors, I assume at his urging and with his agreement, have said, we will not be complicit, America, in any Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear proliferation sites. Telling Iran Israel does not have the support of America, and America does not have Israel's back. The Israelis don't think America has their back. Try taking the poll of Israelis and their confidence in Barack Obama.
Okay, if you want to talk about Israel, then here we go. Well, in addition to what I was saying before, while the President's record of defending Israel's security speaks to his commitment to Israel's safety, his diplomatic defense of Israel when it mattered most, reflected in his 100% pro-Israel voting record at the United Nations. Reagan didn't have that. And most recently, his reported personal insistence on inserting language in the Democratic Party platform that declares Jerusalem the capital of Israel speaks to his personal commitment to the Jewish state and his expressed gratitude to Israel's leaders. The President's impassioned defense of Israel last September at the United Nations against the Palestinian Authority's unilateral statehood bid earned him, quote unquote, a badge of honor, according to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and his administration's veto of the UN Security Resolution condemning Israeli settlements when he praised from the Prime Minister's office. His immediate intervention to save the lives of 6 Israelis trapped inside the Israeli embassy in Cairo was, in the words of former Mossad director Ephraim Halevi, quote, leadership of historic dimensions, end quote. To which Netanyahu added, quote, we owe the President a special measure of gratitude. Deputy Foreign Minister Dani Ayalon summed up these sentiments last year when he said, quote, I can tell you in a very categoric way, I believe also in a very authoritative way, that we have not had a better friend than President Obama. These are Israeli officers. These are officers of government. Netanyahu, Ayalon, and Halevi, these are the people who know better than we do what Obama has done for Israel. And they are all saying that, and very appreciatively, that Obama has really come through for Israel in a way that no previous president has. I remind you of Ehud Barak, the Minister of Defense of the State of Israel. If anybody knows and he has been around, by the way, as part of the government since President Carter. And he has said that no president since President Carter has done for Israel what Obama has done for Israel. So if that's your issue, if that is your issue, I remind you, look at the facts. Look at what he has done, right? Not all of the speeches and all of that. Look at what he has done, both in terms of money and in terms of actual hardware for protecting the state of Israel and at the United Nations. And if you want both the security of the state of Israel now, and you want at least a possibility of peace, because ultimately the security of the state of Israel is going to be a peace agreement. And if you want a peace agreement between Israel and its neighbors, then you can't go to Israel and basically insult the Arabs, right? It's not going to happen. And so if you want a peace agreement, which is the ultimate form of security for the state of Israel, and you want, in the meantime, military hardware to defend it, Obama's your man.
Okay, I'd like to just change the subject for a second and move on to something besides the Middle East, and we'll get back to the Middle East and entitlements. In my decades of work in the Jewish community and studying Jews' sense of self in this country, I've come to the conclusion that modern notions, the last 45, 50 years notions of church-state separation probably have more to do with how we feel about ourselves, not as supplicants and not as existing here at the sufferance of the Christian majority, but as feeling as full American citizens, than just about anything else, except perhaps for the creation of the state of Israel. Governor Romney made clear that his models for appointments to the Supreme Court are Justices Scalia and Thomas, and perhaps Alito, I'm not sure. What appointees would Governor Romney make to the Supreme Court that would secure the separation of church and state, which is, as far as I can tell, a clear and important principle for the security and the continued success of the American future?
Shall I take it? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Mormon community, which has had its difficulties in America as a small religious community. Ups and downs. In fact, it's the only religious community native to America that ever really was thrown out of America. At the time, it was pushed out of what were the United States into territories that weren't yet states. The governor repeatedly speaks about religious liberty when he answers questions about religion and politics. This is his orientation. He's very sensitive to that. It happens that the Mormons are particularly fond of the Jews and the Jewish state of Israel. So we've got that going for us as well. The third thing I'd say, briefly, is when he was governor of Massachusetts, he was quite balanced in the people he surrounded himself with. Both the people who worked in his administration came from both parties, came from all races and religion, and the people he appointed to the bench in Massachusetts. So he's very responsible, very thoughtful, very fair-minded, and I think very statesmanlike on questions of church and state and religious liberty, respecting all people in this country. And he has a track record of being very collaborative and friendly toward a range of citizens.
He won't be sitting at the Supreme Court. An appointee of his, a la Scalia or Thomas, will be sitting at the Supreme Court. I understand that.
Well, I happen to be a fan of both Alito and Scalia and Thomas. I also respect judges whose political perspective I don't always care for. I think the American people are very mature about this. Unless somebody is far beyond the pale, they trust that very wise people who go through a big vetting process will wind up on the Supreme Court of the United States. There are libertarian thinkers in the federal courts. There are conservative thinkers in the federal courts. There are liberal-minded and progressive thinkers. There's a balance on the court. It's likely that a president of 4 or 8 years will pick a range of people to the federal bench. And I'm pretty confident that the governor has a track record of being responsible in his appointees to the courts.
Rabbi Dorff, you have a mic.
Yes. Can you hear me or not?
Yes.
I must say that I'm very concerned because Justice Ginsburg is getting on in years, and for that matter, so is Justice Kennedy, and as well as Justice Scalia. And it is at least possible that one or more of them will resign over the course of the next 4 years. And so the president for the next 4 years will inevitably nominate people for the court. And it's a very tight mix at the moment. As you know, it's basically 5-4, 6 Catholics and 3 Jews. You know, Protestants ever let this happen. But if you notice the appointments that first of all 3 women on the court were nominated by President Clinton and President Obama, Democrats. And it seems to me that if you read Justice Breyer's book on the way in which the law ought to function, and then you read Justice Scalia's book on the way in which the law ought to function, I just think Justice Breyer has it. The whole notion of what is original intent, that's not the way that the law works. By the way, it's not the way that Jewish law works either. The way that the law really works has to do with how it can best function in the society as it exists now. Does that mean that you effectively take over the function of the legislature? No, it doesn't mean that. But what it does mean, and by the way, there have been activist judges very much on the right, as we've seen over the last 4 years, just as there have been activist judges on the left during the Warren Court. So that, by activist here, I think what is intended as an insult, and what is intended is that the judges have gone beyond their proper role. And I frankly worry about appointees of Governor Romney. I've been very very happy with the appointees of President Obama, and I would hope that he has another 4 years to appoint some more.
Both of you briefly, or at least Larry mentioned the issue of abortion. I don't quite know where the Romney ticket is on abortion, but I know that there is wide support. It may not be a Jewish, quad-Jewish issue, but certainly there's wide support in the Jewish community on abortion. Where do you both view your candidates coming out on the issue of abortion, on the right to choose, and on when abortion is appropriate or ought to be legal?
Well, I very much appreciated what Vice President Biden said at the end of that debate. He is a Catholic and very much believes in a Catholic approach to abortion, but he understands that in a free country, a country that wants to preserve freedom of religion, that he should not try to get the government to impose his position on every American. And that's exactly my own feeling. In the Jewish tradition, by and large, abortion is prohibited, not as an act of murder, because according to the Talmud, you don't have a full-fledged human being until until birth. Actually, what you have in the first 40 days of pregnancy is simply liquid. That's the Talmud's word. And from the 41st day of pregnancy to the moment of birth, you have something like the thigh of its mother. So abortion is prohibited by and large in Jewish law, not as an act of murder, but as an act of self-injury. It is required, however, when the mother's life or health is at stake. And then there is a middle ground where either there's an elevated risk to the life or health of the mother beyond that of normal pregnancy, for example, if she has diabetes, in which case she may abort in order to avoid the extra risk, or she may decide to take the extra risk but have more doctor's visits to make sure that she's safe. And now that we know what's going on in utero, a lot of rabbis would also permit abortion if you know that the child is going to have a lethal genetic disease like Tay-Sachs. So my own position is that I have to tell my fellow Jews that even if abortion is allowed for any reason whatsoever in this country, we should not take advantage of that permission. There are all kinds of things that you're permitted to do that you should not do. You are permitted to smoke, but you should not. You're permitted to abuse drugs, but you should not. Here's my Achilles heel. You're permitted to eat a half a gallon of ice cream every night of the week. As you're doing it, you might as well be mint chocolate chip. Jerry Garcia, that's so good. Anyway, but you should not, okay? And in the same sort of a way here, it may be permitted by American law, and I think it should be permitted by American law, precisely for the reason that Thomas Jefferson said. Thomas Jefferson said that when Americans agree on a moral issue, then you can have legislation on it. We agree on legislation against murder, theft, rape, and so on, and we agree on positive legislation requiring the payment of taxes, education of children, and the like. But where Americans disagree on a moral issue, as they certainly do on abortion, then the government should stay out of it and should allow individuals to decide that issue on their own.
So it's a question a little bit about religion and morality. A priest, a minister, and a rabbi are playing golf. It's just the three of them, so they move smartly down the front nine, and they see ahead of them a foursome of blind golfers. The father shouts out, "I'm so impressed. Take your time, gentlemen. We'll wait for you." The pastor says, "How lovely. Wonderful to see you all out here." The rabbi, too, is very touched. He calls his colleagues together and says, "Clergymen, you know, they could play at night." The joke inspires me to recognize the authority of thoughtful rabbis like we have here, who offered a balanced and sober conversation about abortion. It's a difficult issue for most Americans, but most Americans are in a broad middle class, as I think Governor Romney would be. They're troubled by abortion. Many think it's immoral, either religiously instructed or impressed by how far science has come to recognize that potential life is alive and growing. It may not be born yet, but it's worth something. It's worth, in fact, protecting. But that there may be a range of solutions. Many of us are troubled by Roe v. Wade, which federalized abortion and removed from the states the opportunity for people to learn, discuss, and vote on it. In fact, Governor Romney said he's not aware of any particular extreme or legislative agenda right now. He's obviously downgraded this issue because he's not a warrior on this subject. It's actually President Obama who had the more extreme view, at least earlier in his life, when as a state senator in Illinois, he was the only one to vote against the Born Alive Infant Protection Act, which was an extreme view that some groups in Illinois pushed, which he wanted to support then and then. So, most Americans are on a broad spectrum. Most of us can live with a variety of legal regimes regarding this. Most of us don't want the federal government to pay for abortion. And finally, many of us are concerned about the Obama administration policy, which would tell the Catholic Church in its various forms, schools and churches and others, that they must have the federal mandates on purchasing contraception and birth control, etc., for their employees or their associates. So I think Governor Romney would fit within the broad mainstream of American society.
If the grand bargain vis-a-vis the budget isn't reached within the next 4 or 5 months, there is a likelihood of our falling off the cliff and extreme budget cuts taking place, including, I think, $500 billion to the defense budget. Where are your candidates vis-a-vis the defense budget and trimming what is the size of the budget that had to fight 2 wars simultaneously, and where do you think we ought to end up, and how would that impact support for Israel and our Israel?
So here is a disappointment. The WARN, W-A-R-N Act, I call it the WARN Act, says that defense contractors must tell their employees by law, 60 days, in some states 90 days, that they're going to be fired. But if they are told they're going to be fired due to sequestration, due to automatic defense cuts that are planned, which can then be repealed in a different budget deal, but at the moment, they're going to be fired as we have defense cuts coming. We've already had $487 billion in defense cuts. They're planning another $500 billion in defense cuts, which will bring our Navy to the lowest since 1915, cut many Marines, cut Air Force, cut the number of ships. China has 200-something ships in the Pacific. We only have 283 ships total. So that gives you a sense about the pivot to Asia that the president was bragging about. You must tell the defense contractors, must tell their employees that they're going to be let go, that pink slips are coming. The president said, don't do that. You don't have to tell them. We'll back you up. We'll pay for the litigation if the employees then sue you because they weren't given proper notice. So Washington, D.C. and Virginia and defense contractors all over America are in a panic right now. And they have to let people know because June 1 is coming up soon. And in fact, it'll be within 60 days or 90 days. So they've got to send out the pink slips now by November 1. For sure they have to send out the pink slips. But guess what? If people got pink slips on November 1, it would be right before the election. Oh, I'm about to be fired. Who do I want to vote for on November 6th? So the president played a very not nice game with the defense companies and employees. Most people believe in Ronald Reagan's dictum, peace through strength, that we need to be resolute, that we need to be so strong, as Governor Romney puts it, that nobody dares mess with us. That a resolute America is good for the whole world, not just for us. It would impact, by the way, the U.S.-Israel relationship, some of the defense cuts. And last sentence or two, which is a rebuttal to a statement made earlier, bragging about the president regarding Israel. The president delayed, and then delayed again, and now has downgraded the U.S.-Israel joint military exercises in the region. And he limited the number of troops, and he limited the number of assets. Why is that important? Because Israel will be more confident at this very moment of concern about Iran if America shows up in big numbers to have joint exercises. And finally, the president did not stand by Israel, as was bragged about. During a big counterterrorism conference that was held, all countries in the world who were concerned about terrorism got together. Not only was Israel not invited, but they weren't allowed to be on the agenda when they talked about countries facing terrorism. The president, again, has not stood behind Israel on matters of military defense.
I just repeat to you all of the numbers. He has given more to Israel for military buildup and for military hardware and for defense kinds of things, as well as for foreign aid, than all other presidents combined. And he has, supported Israel in the United Nations in ways that Ronald Reagan did not. And Reagan is the favorite Republican because Bush can't be. So therefore, Ronald Reagan is the favorite model for Governor Romney now. if you look at Ronald Reagan's history in terms of what he did with Israel, he insulted the Vice President of Israel a number of times. He did not back Israel in the United Nations. And if that's Governor Romney's model, then oy vey for Israel. In terms of the budget, notice that President Bush put 2 wars on the nation's credit card. And we're paying for it. That's where trillions of dollars of our debt that are going to be paid by our children and grandchildren came from. And I think that was strictly immoral. Aside from the fact that it's terrible practical policy, it's strictly immoral to put that kind of burden on our children and our grandchildren. And now what President Obama and the rest of the country is faced with is how do you bring a military budget within the regular budget so that there's transparency in terms of what we really are spending and in terms of what money we have to begin with and also what we're spending. How do you get transparency? And then how do you cut down the deficit in a reasonable way so that you don't ruin the country at the same time that you're cutting down the deficit in a balanced kind of way. And that will include some changes in terms of the military budget, but it will not come, as the Ryan budget would have it, it would not come on the backs of the poor, the uneducated, and the seniors.
So David was nice enough to allow me a second bite at the apple for a colloquy here. So when you bring up President Reagan, our beloved President Reagan, one of the things that he did was anticipate what would happen over 10, 20, 30 plus years in terms of the age of missiles. And as the author and creator and inventor and supporter and funder of missile defense, he is eternally held as a leader of great importance to the Israeli people. It is President Reagan's missile defense projects which has made a difference in the technology and the safety of Israel and our allies around the world. It was President Obama which downgraded missile defense, offended the Poles and Czechs, and by the way, you were concerned about Governor Romney's misview with England. President Obama revealed to the Russians the British nuclear deterrence, and actually as part of the START talks, tattletale on Britain the number and capability of their missile defense. Lech Walesa, the pro-American leader of dissidents and reformers in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, who knows about Russia and North Korea and the need for missile defense, raved about Governor Romney and endorsed him over President Obama.
Much of American indifference to Israel historically before the Six-Day War was because of our dependence on foreign oil. Where do your candidates stand in terms of energy independence, in terms of alternative fuels, in terms of sustainability, and all those related issues?
I don't know that there's a lot of difference, frankly. I mean, I think both of them want to make America energy independent. President Obama has been interested in sources of energy other than oil as well as oil, and has pushed it, I don't think, as much as Vice President Gore would have pushed it, frankly, if he had been elected. But the President has been interested in developing solar energy and wind energy and water energy in addition to oil energy, and has approved the use of a number of offshore of American shores, a number of those kinds of oil grounds to be developed, also in Alaska. So, I mean, it's not as if he's anti-oil, although he has not allowed the oil and gas industry to do whatever it wants. One of the real issues, I think, facing us, frankly, as a nation, is whether we should engage in fracking. And that is exactly an issue that Israel has to face as well, because it turns out that if fracking were used, then Israel is sitting on a lot of oil. And it's but it requires this particular way of getting to the oil, which has real dangers in it about spoiling the water supply. And so whether both the Israelis and the Americans want to engage in fracking is an issue that about which serious minds have disagreed, and I'm not completely sure that anybody really knows the answer to that. But I think what is true is that the President has been interested in developing all sources of energy to make America energy independent. And the truth of the matter is that in the 4 years that he has been President, we have become less and less dependent on foreign oil.
So here there is a big difference actually between the candidates and the philosophies. Americans are suffering at the gas pump. It makes a big difference in our economy. Secretary of Energy Stephen Chu bragged about how he was going to drive up, remember, the cost of oil at the pump as a way to get us off oil. Except we found out that we're very rich in natural gas and in coal, which we can get more and more cleanly through technology, and in oil and petroleum. President Obama has been doing all he can to limit the supply of petroleum, from failing to give permits for drilling, to killing the Keystone Pipeline, to forbidding American oil companies to drill in the Gulf of Mexico. But he did grant permits to Brazilian companies. He restricted oil shale drilling. And he's not been for the development of any new oil refineries in America. President Obama is limiting the supply of oil and driving up the cost of gasoline at the pump. It also prevents us from getting energy independent, which we can be and we all want to be. And all of us do like the rhetoric of all of the above. But the Obama administration has spent $90 billion on subsidies for wind and solar, and it's still not competitive economically. And a lot of that money went offshore, and many of the solar panels and wind turbines are being built with labor abroad and not using American workers. It has been a failed and disastrous energy policy. The question is about Iran and what the governor might do differently. So there's a long history of missing signs that countries were getting close to the bomb. We missed the timing of the Soviet nuclear test in '49. We got the timing wrong on China in the 60s, India in the 70s, Pakistan in the 80s. We're still not completely sure what North Korea's capability and intentions are. Iran admits that it lied all along and deceived. There was a moment when they did stop some of their proliferation efforts. Do you remember when that was? In 2003, when there were 150,000 plus American troops nearby in Iraq. But then they reinitiated their nuclear fuel cycle, and they're close. They admit they're close, they say they're close. Everybody knows the eliminationist rhetoric that comes out of Iran from a range of leaders in Iran. The president has contained Israel and punched at Israel and used senior military to beat up on Israel and not Iran. What Governor Romney has said is there'll be no daylight between me and the Israelis, that any disagreements we have will be private, and that the world will know that we stand by our allies, not just Israel, by the way, and Iran is not just a problem for Israel, it's a problem for Moderator countries, of course, it's a problem for Europeans. It's true that the world is more united now regarding Iran, because the clock is really ticking. But it's not a credit to the president, who embarrassed the Western world by not standing by the dissidents in Iran in 2009, by sending them happy birthday cards to Iran, by failing 3 or 4 times in diplomacy. And by the way, several times it's been bragged about how the president stands with Israel at the UN. But there are things that happen at the UN that never would have happened under President Bush or President Reagan. Efforts have been made. The Palestinians would have never tried their stunt to declare unilateral statehood under President Bush. It's only by Barack Obama, his Nobel Prize winning, let's make friends with everybody around the world worldview, that the Palestinians dare tried that at the UN. So, Governor Romney will be resolute, he'll be thoughtful. War is the last option, but only the credible threat of the use of military force is likely to get the Iranians, as they have in the past, to stop running the centrifuges, enriching the uranium from 3% to 5% to 20%, and then it's just a little bit of a leap to the 90% where it's weapons grade. Hopefully, people of either party in Congress and the White House will be strong enough and smart enough to continue a cyber effort to disrupt Iran's program or do whatever it takes at the last minute if it need be. But why do we have to go through so much drama and tension between these two great allies, the United States and Israel?
When President Bush took office, Iran's nuclear weapons program was virtually non-existent. By the time he left, Iran had thousands of centrifuges spinning, and its power in the region was on the rise. Yet when Israel requested bunker-busting bombs for potential use against the Iranian nuclear threat, Bush said no. Will Mitt Romney follow in his footsteps? And think back to how President Bush also treated Israel. His administration allowed Israel's qualitative military edge to erode and deteriorate, violating security agreements with Israel. It rescinded nearly $300 million in loan guarantees to our closest Middle East ally as punishment for construction activities in the West Bank. The Bush administration endorsed Hamas's participation in Palestinian elections over Israeli objections, and you know what happened in Gaza as a result of that. President Obama, on the other hand, has first of all supported the military of the State of Israel to the point that the defense minister of the State of Israel, who again knows more about that issue than anybody in this room, has said that President Obama has done more for the security of the State of Israel than any previous president. And on Iran, he has brought in Russia and China on the boycott. And as a result, as you saw in the paper just a week or two ago, the rial of Iran fell in its worth 40% within 1 week. And as a result, these economic sanctions are beginning to take hold. What will happen in the next few weeks and months, as a result, in terms of the nuclear issue, is anybody's guess. But clearly, if we can get Iran to stop that, and to stop their nuclear program as a result of economic sanctions, that's preferable than engaging in yet another war in the Middle East. And are we going to put that on the nation's credit card as well? So what President Obama is doing, it seems to me, number one, is beginning to work because he has restored the relations of the United States to other countries, including our best allies that President Bush had really soured. And as a result of restoring those relationships, he's gotten even Russia and China to be part of these boycotts of Iran. And that, it seems to me, is a much better way of trying to avoid nuclear Iran than starting yet another war in the Middle East.
The questions tend to cluster, and quite a few of them are upset about the fact that President Obama has not visited Israel in his 4 years in office. So what is your response to the fact that President Obama hasn't gone to Israel since he has been inaugurated?
7 of the last 11 presidents, including Ronald Reagan and Harry Truman, who famously recognized Israel's independence minutes after it was declared, never made the trip. Of the 4 who did visit Israel, 2, Richard Nixon and George W. Bush, did so only in their last year in office. What's more, as the Washington Post review of State Department records shows, every president who visited Israel did so only after visiting Egypt and Saudi Arabia first. So if visiting Israel is the test of whether you support Israel, 7 of the 11 presidents that we've had since Israel was founded never did it, and 2 of them did it only in their last year of office, their 8th year of office. So that, it seems to me, is just a bogus criterion for deciding whether a president really supports Israel. What's much more important is what they do. And what President Obama has done is support Israel more than any previous president. Just ask Ehud Barak, ask Netanyahu, ask any of the other members of the... Yes, Netanyahu has said so as well. Netanyahu does not like the fact that the 2 of them don't agree on exactly the timetable in terms of Iran, although even on that, as you noticed, he himself has changed his mind. It used to be within 2 months, now it's the spring, right? And his primary military leaders are advising him against Israel doing it on its own. The equivalent of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Israel are advising Netanyahu not to do this alone. And Obama doesn't want to do it if he can avoid it, because we don't need another war in Iran, in the Middle East. We've seen through the war in Iraq, and now even in the war in Afghanistan, the limits of American power to do regime change. Ultimately, we can help in that, but we can't make it happen on our own. If we haven't learned anything from Iraq, we should have learned that. And so consequently, I think President Obama is doing the exact right thing in terms of trying to avoid a nuclear Iran.
So one clarifying point, the amount of money spent by President Obama in Afghanistan dwarfs what was spent by President Bush in many more years than was spent under Obama. Many more lives lost, much bigger expense. It was Obama who surged up in Afghanistan, so I don't think that's a fair critique to blame the Afghan war and the expenses on President Bush. Obama doubled down, and we spent a lot more money. On the question of Israel, on the question of Israel, so it's not only that he didn't visit Israel, he wouldn't visit the Israeli Prime Minister when he came to town. Okay, and he also, where did he go? He went to the Arab world. And when he went to the Arab world, it wasn't just the deep down to the Saudi king. It was the deep down to some fantasy that Muslims were integrally involved in the founding of America. Remember that? And that our presidents read the Quran. They did read the Quran. Do you know why? Because they underlined important passages since we were fighting the Barbary pirates, the same war against jihad, jihad's war on the West that we're still fighting now, we were fighting then. It was a fantasy that we were going to get along perfectly with the Arab world, and that he was going to remake the Middle East, and by the way, it was all Israel's fault in the settlements. The president picked a fight with the Prime Minister of Israel and Likud before he ever took office. Remember his quote, "You don't have to be pro-Likud to be pro-Israel." Since when do presidents of the United States put their thumb on the scale and take sides in the domestic politics and basically say, I don't want to be friends with one of the political parties in your nation, but I'd be friends with the other side? The Israelis are furious at Barack Obama. Everybody knows it. It's a fantasy to say that everything's been great between the Israelis and the Americans. They have limited some of the technology in the arms sales to Israel. They downgraded the joint military exercises. The Obama-Bibi dispute is likely to continue if Barack Obama gets reelected. And I'm very concerned. Remember when he said off mic to Sarkozy, I have to deal with him every day. That's not a sign of friendship and closeness. It reminds us of the other off mic comment that he said to Medvedev. Oh, I'll be more flexible when I get reelected. Everybody's concerned about Barack Obama in his second term on foreign policy.
I'm really concerned about Governor Romney. Because very frankly, it's hard to know what he means, whether he means what he says today. Because he has flip-flopped on a whole series of issues, including this one. And let me make the case for Obama. The case for Obama's Israel policy begins with record high levels of foreign military financing. The Obama administration has increased security assistance to Israel every single year since the president took office, providing nearly $10 billion in aid, covering roughly a fifth of Israel's defense budget over the last 3 years. To put this in perspective, this is about 20% higher than the remaining 6 dozen recipients of U.S. foreign military aid combined. Historic aid levels have been complemented by other steps to ensure Israel's unrivaled military advantage in the region, including high-level consultation with Israeli officials on U.S. arms sales to the region, operational cooperation to improve Israel's conventional military and counterterrorism capabilities, and providing Israel with advanced technology such as the 5th generation Stealth Joint Strike Fighter, to which no other state in the Middle East has access. Under Obama's direction, the United States has also deepened defense cooperation aimed at helping Israel address its most pressing security concerns, including rocket and missile threats emanating from the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran. When then-Senator Obama traveled to Israel in 2008, it wasn't for a political fundraiser. Instead, he visited Israeli victims of Palestinian rocket fire in the southern town of Sderot, declaring, I came to Sderot with a commitment to Israel's security. He was in Israel, he just was in Israel before he became president.
Says, why will the Obama administration and the Democratic National Platform not say so? Is there any other country in the world that we treat this way in terms of our denying that the capital is what they say it is?
Both candidates have said that they would move the embassy to the state, to Jerusalem. That has happened virtually every president in the past. There are diplomatic concerns that come into that. And frankly, if that's what the whole issue is, I mean, it is a symbolic issue. I personally would prefer that the American embassy would be there. As far as I know, only the embassy of Costa Rica is in Jerusalem. But it's
And Salvador.
And El Salvador?
Both.
Or both of them, okay. So, I mean, you know, yes, we would prefer it, but that is not the kind of thing that is going to make or break the state of Israel. It obviously would be a wonderful symbol. It ought to happen. Every president in the past has said it would and then didn't do it.
So both Jay Carney and Victoria Nuland, the press secretary and the State Department spokesman, have fumbled this question. Is it the view of the United States that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel? Quote, we're not going to prejudge the outcome of those negotiations, including the final status of Jerusalem. It's a position of lack of clarity, and Governor Romney has made it very clear. I support Jerusalem as the eternal and undivided capital of Israel. The problem for the president is there's a long history of his fumbling this. Do you remember the AIPAC conference in 2008, right before the election, when he said, for sure, Jerusalem is the undivided capital of Israel. And the next day he withdrew that pledge. And it's not the first time that he's beaten up on issue on 67 borders and on other nuances of the Middle East where, instead of being traditional and bipartisan and consistent with American policy, he's kind of swimming out over his skis. There's a problem with President Obama and Bibi Netanyahu and Likud. Why is that? Because he bought the Arab narrative that Israel is occupying the Palestinian land. That's the problem in the Middle East. That's why there's wars. That's why there's jihad. He has a Arab narrative view that occupiers, that third world colonial powers are the problem. He even drew a moral equivalency between the refugees from the Arab lands and the refugees from Israel. And he sees that it's one party is a colonizer, one party is the third world victim. And so they've been unclear on Jerusalem, and it's put Israel into a war.
I just remind you that Governor Romney has zero foreign policy experience, whatever he says.
To change the focus a bit, this question asks, is there too much disparity of income in this country today? Should we as Jews be concerned? Is there too much disparity of income in the country today? Should we as Jews be concerned?
Just one sentence on the last statement, and then I'll answer the question. There was a man from California named Governor Ronald Reagan who helped win the Cold War, and he didn't have too much foreign policy experience. By the way, there was a governor just preceding him who had become president, Jimmy Carter, who had not such a great record in foreign policy. So it can go either way, but I'll trust Governor Romney and his advisors and his worldview. Income disparity. So the top 1% of Americans used to pay about 18% of our federal revenue in taxes. They were responsible for giving about 18% of the total revenue. Today, the top 1% of America's income earners give 38% of the federal revenue to the Treasury. Actually, over time, studies will show, you could please Google this, income differences and disparities have actually shrunk in recent years. And that's because transfer payments have gone up. So more and more people, as we all know, receive more and more welfare and aid to families with dependent children and food stamps and Section 8 housing, and so the income disparity has lessened. Everybody hopes for a rising middle class. I'll stipulate for that. Everybody hopes for an opportunity society. Capital now is very mobile. At the push of a button, it'll go where it is better or less stable. America now has one of the highest corporate income tax rates in the world. I think only a couple countries in Africa have higher income tax rates, 35%. It's not working. Under President Obama, he's proposing as high as 44, approaching 50% tax rate on personal income, including small businesses, which hire most of the workers in America. President Governor Romney, wants to have across-the-board tax cuts, but he said he would not tilt toward the rich. He would make sure that their share of the national income that they're paying now would be maintained even under tax cuts and relief for the American people.
Why do the Republicans continue to say that people who make $1 million or more should not pay the same kinds of percentages as the rest of us? It just simply is unfair. It's simple. I think Warren Buffett was exactly right. right, that he ought to be paying exactly the same percentage, at least the exact same percentage as the secretary. The fact that Republicans have fought that for the last several years, right, and have basically brought the government to the brink of insolvency several times during the last several years. The Republican Congress, representatives, the House of Representatives, is, I think, frankly, a real embarrassment to us all. We need to have a thick safety net. Certainly the Jewish tradition would tell us that we need to have a thick safety net for the poor and for the uneducated and for orphans. And under Congressman Ryan's proposal, all of that goes by the wayside. His own Catholic Church, the bishops of his own Catholic Church, has said that his proposal simply does not meet the moral test.
Here's an unusual question. Mormons have been practicing the ritual of posthumously baptizing Holocaust survivors and victims, particularly and most recently Simon Wiesenthal's parents earlier this year. Governor Romney has admitted and is on record personally participating in this practice himself. Jewish leaders have expressed outrage at this practice. If this is about character, then what does it say about Romney's empathy towards the Jewish community, particularly the children of Jewish Holocaust survivors?
To my knowledge, not only does the governor, but the Mormon Church have all come out against, loudly against, clearly against this practice of trying to convert people who have already passed away, which is a offensive religious practice, which is rare, but if it has been done, I've been told there have been apologies about it. I'm not sure how relevant that is to how Governor Romney will help the economy and stand by Israel, which he loves and said will be his first trip as president, but somebody wanted to ask the question. To my knowledge, it is not a practice that is admired or supported by the Mormon Church.
Will your candidate finally liberate, which is an unusual choice of words, Jonathan Pollock?
To my knowledge, neither candidate made a formal statement on Pollard. The president currently has the burden, and I'm sympathetic. That's a very difficult situation. If I may speak privately and personally, I served in naval intelligence. Pollard, to me, has long since served a disproportionate sentence. On compassion grounds, on the fact that he's not a threat to national security anymore, it seems like there are legitimate arguments. There are some still in the Defense Department and the State Department and others who are very upset at what they claim he did. There was perhaps a biased judge a long time ago who was upset with Israel's relationship with South Africa. There were some memos that went back and forth. Pollard got hammered. He certainly has served a lot longer time than spies for our enemies, much less for our allies. But it's a difficult conversation, held at ranks higher than a humble naval reservist, and I don't think either candidate should be judged positively or negatively as a candidate for president on this complicated subject.
I agree with you.
How is President Obama defending what happened in Libya?
Right. Look, I mean, it was a tragedy in Benghazi. Everybody says so. And now, of course, there's a lot of second guessing as to how it could have been prevented. And, you know, the question is it the fault of the administration? Is it the fault of the Congress? Congressman Ryan voted against a proposal to add money for the U.S. government to add security forces for our embassies, including the embassies in Libya. So who's at fault here? Is it the fault of Congress for not allocating enough money for the defense of our embassies? Is it the fault of particular people involved in that decision? You're going to get a lot of, frankly, backbiting on this issue because nobody wants to own it. The fact of the matter is that it was a tragedy and that a very skilled and beloved the diplomat of the United States was murdered. Even the people of Libya have come out saying that, and you've seen some of those sorts of demonstrations. It was a terrible thing, and we need to do what we need to do in order to prevent those kinds of things in the future. However, as you saw both in the New York Times and in the LA Times in recent years, and in recent days, there is a very difficult balance that American diplomats have to play, and even in terms of the architecture of American embassies and consulates around the world, because what they have to do is balance security on the one side with openness and being a good representative of the United States on the other. And the more that you make an American embassy a fortress and put it outside the center of the city, the more that you communicate the fact that America is not a free country, and that America is not a welcoming country, and that America doesn't want to really have relationships with the country in which that embassy happens to exist. And that's a balancing act. And the State Department and the military that support it and protect it have to make those kinds of judgments. In every country, it's going to be a different issue. But you need to know that it's not just, where were they on security? Where were they on security is a function of how much money they had for security that wasn't allocated by the Republican House of Representatives. And it also is a function of the fact that even if you have all the money in the world for security for your diplomats, you have to balance that security issue with the issue of what diplomats have to do if they're going to be effective diplomats.
So a lot of money will be spent on embassies and consulates around the world. That's been a bipartisan policy supported by Congress and asked for by the State Department and the administration. But that wasn't the problem with it. The problem wasn't that there wasn't enough money. The problem was that they weren't listening. Why weren't they listening when the ambassador himself and others said, we need more security teams in Benghazi at the consulate in Libya? Why weren't they listening? Because they convinced themselves that Osama bin Laden is dead, Al-Qaeda's done, and the war on terror is over. How do I know they have a problem with calling it terrorism? Because Fort Hood was a pretty good example. Right now, there are victims of Fort Hood. 13 Americans were killed, 3 dozen were injured, who don't get combat pay because it was called a workplace incident rather than terrorism of somebody who called his mentor and prayed and shaked his body and said Allahu Akbar and slayed Americans' best and bravest. They don't want to call it terrorism. This has been a shameful cover-up. They lied about the request for security in Libya. They didn't provide the security in Libya. They lied about what they said was a rally or a riot or a spontaneous combustion. It wasn't. They lied and said it was a YouTube video. They then went on television and repeatedly lied about what happened when they knew what had happened, because they knew in real time, because they were filming it real time, and people were on the phone, on cameras, real time, watching what was happening. They can't call it terrorism. The president never uses the word terrorism. He never uses the word Sharia law. He never uses the word jihad. He never calls the enemy by his name. He doesn't understand the fight we're in.
And the fact of the matter is that he very much is interested in terrorism. That's the reason why the United States is taking the steps that it's taking in Yemen. That's the reason why we're still in Afghanistan to fight terrorism. That's the reason why we have Homeland Security that has been boosted by the Obama administration. That's the reason why he is doing his very best to try to get Muslim leaders to condemn terrorism among their own people. Because ultimately, the only way in which you're really going to do that is if the Muslims turn against their own terrorists. You're going to have to, it will not happen militarily. If we've learned nothing over the last 10 years since 9/11, what we have learned is the limits of military solutions to all of this. And I think if you really want a solution, rather than just macho stuff, if you really want a solution, then you have to look toward making it possible for Americans to talk seriously to Muslim and Muslim leaders about getting them to oppose the jihadists among them. In Islam, it's exactly like what it is in Judaism. There are different interpretations of the religion. I happen to be a very good friend of Muhammad Siddiqui, who is the immediate past president of the Islamic Society of North America, PhD from Harvard, who complains bitterly about what he construes to be the takeover of Islam and the distortion of Islam that jihadists have imposed upon Muslims. And those kinds of voices have to be much more in evidence, and you're not going to get that done by bombing them. You're going to get that done by diplomacy, you're going to get that done by education, and you're going to get that done by fighting terrorists where they are, as for example in Yemen, and by calling them terrorists, absolutely, he certainly has done that. But he also understands, that President Obama understands, that it's not simply a matter of military might. What happened in Benghazi had nothing to do with lies. It had to do with information that came out of Benghazi in dribs and drabs. And then they found out what happened and said what happened. I think the Romney campaign is trying to use this because, again, they have zero foreign policy experience.
So I live quite a bit in the real world, and it isn't just about bombing. It's about Dalia Mogahed, President Obama's advisor on Muslim affairs, who says to the women of Araby, not we stand with you in seeking freedom, not we stand with you as being oppressed with honor killings and shaming and female genital mutilation, but preaches back here that the jihad and the burqa are just fine and they're beloved by the women in Araby. The president's policy regarding the Middle East has been a disaster. He sided with the Muslim Brotherhood, the oppressors of people in Egypt. He decided he wanted to call Assad a reformer in Syria. And case after case, the president has not stood by the people who want liberation from tyranny in the Middle East. But he's tried to engage the dictators. It's President Obama who's failed on human rights and supporting dissidents, countering tyranny in the Arab Middle East.
3-minute closing statements from each of the speakers. Since Rabbi Dorff opened, he will give the first of the closing, then Larry.
No, it's reversed.
So I see the note cards that we didn't get to. I'm going to take them home and answer them one by one. So a priest, a minister, and a rabbi are unfortunately all elderly, ill, and in the hospital in the same room. And the doctor comes by to give them all the bad news. And the father says, may I have one final wish, as it were? Yes, of course. I'd like to get together with my family. I'll make that happen, the doctor says. And the pastor says, I have a final wish too. I'd like to go to the chapel, and I'd like to have some time for private prayer. Of course, we'll make that happen. The rabbi is very quiet. Finally, the doctor says, and you, Rabbi, what can I do for you? And the rabbi says, I'd like another doctor. I'd like another doctor. It gives me the chance to say that in addition to the $16 trillion in debt that the president is leaving our children, and he's been a horrible president regarding our economy and job growth and growth in the economy. The growth rates are very low. He's left us with a lot of taxes and a lot of mandates. We didn't get too much to Obamacare, but it's a disaster. He also has not been in favor of medical devices and what they call personalized medicine. Choice and competition is what's going to work in education. Choice and competition is what's going to work in healthcare. He's leaving us a 1960s era model in a 21st century world. We're going to fall behind China and India in terms of numbers of engineers. We're going to fall behind in personalized healthcare, which is the opportunity to wear a patch which can detect what kind of cancer you potentially might get in 5 years or 15 years or 25 years. All of the invention, all of the innovation in a growing free market economy is limited by Obama's mandates. This is a presidency and administration that wants to rule from Washington, D.C. And as our first president, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen, warned us that government can be a fearful master and a difficult servant. The vice president decided that the GOP wants to keep us all in chains. The attorney general was held in contempt of Congress for one of his cover-ups and his deception about Fast and Furious. He failed to enforce the law regarding the new Black Panthers. He called us a nation of cowards. And he opposes voter ID, which of course is the standard in Canada, Mexico, Europe, and Israel. The Secretary of Energy promotes higher and higher gas prices and even roots for them. The Director of Counterterrorism considers Jerusalem to be Al-Quds. The Secretary of Homeland Security considers our borders safer than ever even while 50,000 lives have been murdered and lost on our border, and the war, in fact, has crossed our border. The Treasury Secretary did not pay his taxes. The Secretary of State berates the Prime Minister of Israel for a bureaucratic decision to allow apartment building development in Jewish Jerusalem. The HHS Secretary violated the law and clear policy by unilaterally revoking work requirements for welfare. Even many Democrats joined many Republicans to reinstate the work requirement for welfare. The NLRB sought to deny Boeing the right to create new jobs in South Carolina. The NASA director claims his task is to make Muslims feel better about their contribution to math and science in history. The president unilaterally changed the rules on immigration. Why? Because Senator Rubio dared to come up with a solution that would have had bipartisan support, but the president, as I indicated in my opening remarks, not interested in bipartisanship, not interested in solutions, but everything is seen through a political lens. Obamacare passed in the dark of night. There have been no new trade deals in 4 years. And finally, the president is the one with very little and now very bad experience in foreign policy. He's, after all, the one who called our bravest corpsman. It's a serious campaign by a serious man, Governor Romney, who's been an executive leader in Massachusetts, who's been a person who knows about the economy, who will grow jobs, who will be probably a center-right person in office. And so I think I can confidently say it would be a mitzvah to vote for Romney.
Since we're starting with a joke, I'll start with a joke too. Not a priest, minister, or rabbi, but Catholics think that human beings begin at conception. Roe v. Wade says that human beings begin at birth. Jews don't think that life begins until your child gets an MD degree and moves out of the house. President Obama's record has been absolutely wonderful given what he was given by the Bush administration. The fact of the matter is that if you're talking about bipartisanship, both of the Republican leader of the House and the Republican leader of the Senate, back 2 years ago, already said, we're going to make sure that everything we do in the next 2 years is to make sure that Obama is not reelected. And they have been obstructionists on absolutely everything in order for that alone. And they have said it straight out. And so if you want an obstructionist government, such as we've had over the last 2 years, then you vote for Republicans. If you want a government that's going to do something, then you vote not only for President Obama, but you vote for other Democrats that are running for Congress. And why would you do that? Well, first on social issues, job creation. An economy recovery program supported as many as 3.6 million jobs. By cutting taxes, investing in clean energy, roads and bridges, keeping teachers in classrooms, and protecting unemployment benefits. Obama rescued the auto industry, preventing the loss of more than 1.4 million jobs, not just in autos, but all the ancillary stuff. The private sector has created nearly 4.6 million jobs during 30 straight months of private sector growth. But our work is not done. Obviously, we have to get the employment rate yet further down. The Americans, for the very first time since 2007, now think that the government is going in the right direction. And that's because of the measures that President Obama has put into place. The Democrats have committed to American women and their families, equal pay for equal work, improving women's health, and protecting their right to choose. Democrats have made health care accessible and affordable in ways that it never has been before by ending insurance company abuses, prohibiting insurers from denying coverage to people with pre-existing conditions, canceling coverage when someone gets sick. And they've kept premiums low, they've expanded access to care, so we no longer have 40 million Americans. As of 2014, because of Obamacare, we will no longer have 40 million Americans who don't have health insurance, and they will get coverage, but they will get coverage in the emergency room, which is by far the most expensive place where they can get coverage. So even on a fiscal level, it makes no sense whatsoever what we've been doing until now. But under Obamacare, they will have coverage, and that will be fiscally important and make sense, as well as morally so, because then these people will not have to live with their illnesses until they land in the emergency room. Seniors will understand that the donut hole in terms of their drug coverage has now been closed, and that also is part of Obamacare. He is out to educate the world, to educate us in order to be able to compete in the world, hence Pell Grants, hence a number of education initiatives that he has started. And on Israel, as I've said to you a number of times, he has supported the state of Israel in fact, not just in language, and not just promises, but in fact, over the last 4 years, he has made Israel more secure than it had ever been under any previous president. It just asked Minister of Defense of the State of Israel.
Thank Rabbi Elliot, Dorff, Larry Greenfield, and all of you for coming. I one privilege of the chair. This past summer I happened to be in Philadelphia and went to the National Jewish Museum of American History, a new museum in Philadelphia, and it has the original letter that George Washington sent to the Jewish congregation, the Hebrew congregation in Newport. And there's one paragraph I think as we enter the final weeks before the election, it's important to keep in mind how fortunate we are to live in this country. It is now no more than that toleration is spoken of as if it were the indulgence of one class of people that another enjoy the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effectual support. I hope we will all be the best of citizens. Thank you.